Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this EU-Ukraine Cluster Partnership Program info session. In this session, we will explain you the political background, the details of the call, and also the financial aspects. We will have several presentations, and afterwards we will have time for the questions and answers. My name is Ramūnas Kunsaitis. I'm the head of sector entrepreneurship and clusters in ASMEA, the agency who has launched the call, and I will guide you through this whole process. Next slide. So we start with welcome introduction, then our colleague from DG GROW will explain background, policy, context, and scope of the call. Our colleague from ASMEA will give a presentation on general information on the call for proposals, how to apply. Financial colleagues will provide information about the financial provisions of the call, and colleagues from REA, Central Validation Session Service, will explain about the registration of participants. After each presentation, we will have a short time for questions and answers. And also at the end of the whole session, we have a session for questions and answers. You can start asking your questions in Slido. They will be displayed and you will be able to vote as well. Some housekeeping rules for this session. Your microphone and camera are switched off by default, so no participation by voice or video is possible except the presenters. This meeting is recorded. If you do not wish your name to appear in the recording, please make sure to submit your questions in Slido as anonymous. Once the slides and recording of this meeting will be available on the event page, an email will be sent to you to inform about it. We will also try to answer as many questions as possible. However, if we are not able to answer one of the questions during the session, those questions will be answered in the Q&A again under the call page. Here you see how to reach the Slido. So you can either tap slido.com and enter cluster UA code, or you can scan the QR code and it will directly bring you to the page where you can ask your questions. I would like to introduce my colleague Marek Wsior, Team Leader Cluster Policy in DG GROW Unit D2, European Commission, and he will give you the presentation on the background, policy, context, and the scope of the call. Marek, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ramūnas. Indeed, welcome everyone who is joining this Ukraine Cluster Partnership Program Info Day. We are setting this in a certain particular context. So let me go through why we are doing this, background, policy, context, and scope, what we expect. What I'm going to present is the overview so that you can familiarize when preparing your applications with main documents that we could help you preparing these applications. Next slide, please. So I'm going to present you the industrial policy in general. Then we aim at looking at the EU industry clusters, how they fit, and then we talk about a little bit about Ukrainian integration into the single market, and then some information on the scope and objectives of the call. Next slide, please. So let me start with the industrial policy, because we are in the context of industrial policy here. So the main thing for us is implementation of the next slide, please, of the EU industrial policy. So what about EU industrial policy? The key and main documents for the EU industrial policy are the document from the March 2020 EU industrial policy that we launched, which was set the scene for this Commission's mandate and beyond, in particular focusing our efforts and clearly setting long-term development vision for the EU industry, And I want to stress it because it's something which is very added value of the European Union, the stability of objective in the long run. So here we are aiming and having the green transition with this main objective to be the first climate neutral continent by 2050. So reducing CO2 emissions and get sustainable as wherever we can, in view of as well economic viability of our solutions. Then the second pillar, digital transition. I jump to the digital transition because this is, we are always talking about twin transition, green and digital transition, where we all know how important it is to embrace the digital solutions wherever. I will talk later about this in more details. And then the third pillar was about global competitiveness. So using, in the EU, we have now 30 years of anniversary of the single market, 440 million people, one of the biggest economic blocks in the world, 25% of EU world GDP. This is a huge block which has an economic power, and that's why the third dimension of this EU industrial policy in March 2020 was that we create right conditions so that we have sufficient scope and scale of our activities to set global standards. And then we had COVID in February 2020 and then 21, and then we needed to 20, and then we of course it raised all this what we know disruptions in supply chains, issues with the lack of vaccines or not existence of vaccines. So we needed to update our industrial policy. Also, you know, we have started to work on the agenda of industrial policy, highlighting the importance of skills. And then in 2023, we have put some more details on green industrial plan. So next slide, please. And when we updated our EU industrial policy, then we stressed very much on the basis of the lessons learned the need for strengthening single market resilience. And you might be already familiar with the so-called Letta report, the former prime minister from Italy, about the single market. As well, many others are highlighting the extreme importance right now of deepening single market in order for us as the EU to be more competitive. So this is going to stay and even be more reinforced. Then we have the need to accelerate the twin green and digital transitions, and COVID, of course, because we needed to do a lot remotely, improved very much digital literacy of all of us, but as well raise awareness how important digital transition is. But the COVID as well gave us a very clear indication that if we cut supply chains, then we are in difficult positions for many enterprises. There was an issue with the lack of microchips, then it influenced as well automotive production. So all is very much interlinked. So we must analyze and address strategic dependencies, and then with a view of boosting clean tech production. So you can use this QR rights and QR codes. We have you can download the updated industrial strategy of May 2021, which is the main document for industrial strategy. But as well, we updated with the annual single. We report on implementation in the annual single and competitiveness market report, and the latest is from February 2024, where we go through implementation as well through industrial ecosystems. And this industrial ecosystem, it is something which was introduced in the industrial strategy, where we highlight 14 main, most important industrial ecosystems in the EU, covering more or less 80% of the EU GDP. And these ecosystems is not a pure old way sectoral approach. It is the ecosystem mindset is about encompassing all players operating in the value chain. So we are talking about everyone who is related, for example, with textiles or retail or construction, including academia, not only business, as well academia, research, service providers. So the whole ecosystem, and very much clusters are tangible element of the industrial ecosystem. So the Commission analyzes systematically these ecosystems and gives indications on the implementation of these ecosystems. And in this competitiveness market reports, you can read the latest, which I think it will be very helpful while preparing applications. Next slide, please. And then we go to the Green Deal Industrial Plan, and there are two main elements of this Green Industrial Plan. The third one is about energy, improving energy, but I will focus here on the two which are the most relevant for this call. It's about critical raw materials. Critical Raw Materials Act, which is about simplification, permitting, encouraging investments, improving skills in this. But the main purpose of this act is, which is right now still under final negotiations, and hopefully both are going to be adopted before this parliamentary mandate. It's with the biggest that there are three objectives of this. At least 10% of the EU's annual consumption from extraction to be achieved by 2030, at least 40% of the EU's annual consumption for processing to be reached by 2030, and at least 15% of the EU's annual consumption for recycling. And not more than 65% of the Union's annual consumption of each strategic raw material at any relevant stage of processing from a single third country. This is to create secure and resilient EU critical raw materials supply chain. Basically, what we are aiming is to ensure that EU is under risk to, as far as supplies are concerned, and we invest in research, innovation, in skills, at the same time protecting environment. So diversifying the Union's imports of critical raw materials here is the key. And what kind of critical raw materials is indicated in this document. The other document, very important, is the Net Zero Industry Act, which is our European Commission proposal. And here I would encourage you to look at the technologies. They're very much related to net zero energy production. It is the main purpose of this is to facilitate market access for net zero carbon products and support the development of net zero skills and innovation. And here I would encourage you to look at the technologies that we are supporting here. Here it's like wind energy, solar energy, geothermal, or carbon sequestration and storage. Next slide, please. Digital transition. And here it goes across the board, from e-skills, e-government, creating sufficient infrastructure, where we are talking about quantum, and having e-business, applying and IT solutions in manufacturing using AI. And here we have, again, let me start from the latest, but AI innovation package, the first in the world, comprehensive solution, the regulatory framework for artificial intelligence to support European startups and SMEs, and uptake of AI use in manufacturing and administration. Then, of course, the CHIPS Act, which is to stimulate development of microelectronics and production of chips in Europe. And the first one which we adopted regarding the digitalization was Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act on particularly consumer protection, fair competition, and fundamental rights, so that we what is virtual is as much valid and can be penalized as it's in real. This is about digital. And the last one on resilience, something that, next slide please, which we are right now developing, is the strategic technologies for Europe platform. This is the platform which is going to support investments for the development and manufacturing of critical technologies, clean tech, digital tech, deep tech, and biotech. And this is not new money. It is the channeling actually money funding from all existing already funds, but particularly focusing on the reaching out or getting into implementation and development of this 3-4 critical technologies. Particularly, I repeat, clean tech, digital tech, deep tech, and biotech. 1.1 billion euro at this moment it will be channeled, but with leverage it will be much more. This is the one of the tangibles approaches for having more resilient EU. This is in general. So summing up this part of industry: green transition, digital transition, resilience building through skills, technology, and funding. Next slide, please. And now in this context, we have industry clusters. Clusters understood as geographic concentration of companies and related entities which are working on a specific field on the territory. Next slide, please. So in general, to ones who are not very much familiar with clusters, but I will assume that for this call, which is dedicated mainly for EU-Ukraine cluster partnerships, it's familiar, but nevertheless, the clusters, it's about market intelligence on the go. Clusters know exactly, having researchers, having SMEs, businesses, knowing about market, knowing about technologies, knowing about inputs, knowing about distribution channels. They put it all together. They integrate all this knowledge in a tacit way that is not visible in any reports. And this is what is huge asset of clusters. That helps to really provide technical solutions which are relevant for the market, which are relevant for the development, in order to get customers, in order to satisfy needs of users. This helps as well pooling purchasing of inputs, the workers in this specific territory, because it's competition with collaboration. They are very much skilled and focusing on, for example, automotive or textiles or hydrogen. And this helps as well to access to high cost resources, which, for example, could be building a common infrastructure of Fab Lab, which is very expensive. And last but not least, industry advocacy. They represent as well the voice of business in view of presenting the latest issues or strategic proposals for strategic development to policymakers. You know, this famous smart specialization strategy is being developed in Europe, where businesses and clusters are involved in so-called entrepreneurial discovery process to design together priorities. So all of this shows the advantages of having clusters. We have evidence wherever we have clusters quite developed in the region. The region is better in know-how, in research and development spendings, in higher employment, in higher value added, higher productivity. And we encourage you to look at these recommendations of the European Expert Group on Clusters, which was published in 2021. And then you can read further concrete applications of what clusters do. Next slide, please. And here we are. In Europe, we have estimate of 3,000 nodes, clusters. 1,500 are managed by cluster organizations, which are operating at the single market, and they are at our European Cluster Collaboration Platform. The European Cluster Collaboration Platform, you can see here the link. This is our way of the European Commission window for clusters to the EU policy, but as well to meet each other. The 1,500 cluster organizations across EU. You can watch European Cluster Panorama, which we will be now updating, and we'll publish new version this year, still in the spring. Next slide, please. When I'm talking about this 1,500 cluster organization, I'm talking about a huge multiplier, because these organizations have 160,000 SMEs, 17,000 big companies, 12,000 research academia as members. So it's a huge group of people who simply easy can collaborate across the board, and we need to make as much as possible as the EU to make them collaborate efficiently. So we have this European Cluster Collaboration Platform, and we establish right now as well the so-called Euro clusters, 30 cluster partnerships. Right now it's more or less 2,000 SMEs, but get funding through the Euro clusters to innovate, upskill, and go global. I think this is very useful for this call, that you look at the Euro clusters partnerships which are created at EU level, and maybe you could see inspirations for how to create the EU-Ukraine partnerships on which topics, in order to complement or reinforce the existing Euro clusters. Why clusters actually? To get this link between the businesses from Ukraine and EU. It is very simple. I just listed it here, 6 main reasons, but the main is that already clusters are very set up and running in every member state and across ecosystems. They can address the green and digital transitions, because just to tell you, 250 clusters in Europe are the clusters which are green tech clusters. So they are producing green tech solutions. Around 400 there are digital clusters, so they are producing digital solutions. And the art is that this supply meets demand with other clusters, which can be as well users of these solutions. Even in traditional sectors, which always seem to be very traditional, I will not name them, but you could imagine that some are considered less and more advanced. So they can definitely connect the whole value chain and ecosystems and regions. So that's why we want clusters to create partnerships. Next slide, please. We have a range of services. If you are thinking about how to improve the quality of working of Ukrainian clusters, or EU clusters as well, we set up the cluster talks, where the most important is to have updated information about the regulatory environment changes, policy. So this is what we are going with, constant feedback from the clusters. We have the meetings in regions and specific workshops. Ukraine dedicated was last year in March 2023 in Košice, thanks to Slovakian clusters to organizing and bringing first meeting actually of this kind between EU and Ukrainian businesses after the war started. And then the others are C2 Lab, where we train, coach how to build business case. Cluster Booster Academy, very much about learning on skills of managing clusters. For example, how to create business case, and a business plan, strategic development of cluster. And last but not least, and most important, probably most effective, matchmaking between different clusters and members of clusters, ecosystem, within ecosystem and across ecosystems. Next slide, please. And here the 30 partnerships. And the 30 partnerships, I would encourage you to go through the cluster partnerships and see what the partnerships are and what they finance. This is purely bottom-up approach. We give general guidelines, as here we are doing green transition, digital transition, resilience. However, the detailed topics are chosen by the consortia, and it can, in each ecosystem we have this. I will not go through details of this. You can look at our webpage. It ranges from defense to agri-food, rural development, personal medicine. The range is broad as our economy. So next slide, please. And now Ukraine in all this. Next slide, please. Actually the collaboration between Ukraine and the EU started already tangibilized in documents in 2014 with the association agreement. Then you see there was still the program. There was already visa facilitation readmission agreements in June 2017, or comprehensive free trade agreement signed in September 2017. And then we had the war, and we have the war in March 2022, shortly after Ukraine applies for EU membership. Going through this, we are now in a very accelerated way. We came up to the status of candidate country. So November 2023, Commission recommended opening accession negotiations. We are now, it was already agreed with the Council. Right now we are at the moment where there is the accession negotiations going on. So Ukraine is a candidate country, and with the support of the 50 billion euro Ukraine facility, where Ukrainian plan is there. So the first on 20 March 2024, the Commission has spent the first 4.2 billion euro, meaning this all effort is supported with the tangible assets, which is the funding. Next slide, please. And here, this call is part of the Single Market Program, Work Program 2024, which Ukraine joined in 2023. And this is the EU funding program of 4.2 billion over the period 21-27, with the main objective to build competitiveness of SMEs. Ukraine was particularly interested to join this program because it also supports competitiveness of Ukrainian SMEs. This call is complementary to other calls we have, and you can see Erasmus for Young Entrepreneurs, where we project which facilitate exchange of 400, not exchange, but support 430 Ukrainian entrepreneurs. They can have a chance to spend between 1 and 6 months abroad learning from experienced entrepreneurs in the EU. And the other one is Business Bridge, and this is supporting 1,500 Ukrainian war-affected SMEs with financial support of 2,500. You can see this with QR code, what are details, and of course our EU-Ukraine cluster partnership. But besides, there are many other support possibilities for the Ukrainian companies and researchers, notably Horizon EU, where Ukrainian participants are allowed. Next slide, please. And what about now? Now, actually, it seems that according to the data from the National Bank of Ukraine, there is a positive economic outlook in was presented as March 2024. The sea and rail traffic increased, there is stable situation in the foreign exchange market, low inflation expectations, and seasonal recovery in business activity. Of course, with all the constraints that there is still war, the Russian forces intensify attacks, there is the risk of insufficient international financing, which is now after as well support from US lately mentioned, maybe less. The blockade on Ukraine western border is still happening. So next slide, please. And we can see, this is the Eurostat data latest, that percentage share in extra EU trade in goods with Ukraine in imports starts to come back to pre-war levels. So slowly this trade is getting to the levels before war, but of course, I mean, we all know it's not that simple. Next slide, please. So the call. Let me move directly to the call, and of course, more details on this will be given from my colleagues from executive agency. Just going the main objective of this program is to develop value chains, interlinkages between EU and Ukraine companies, and to foster the cluster capacity building and professionalization of support for SMEs. Meaning, we want to build real, sustainable, long-term partnership, collaboration between EU companies and Ukrainian companies, and this can happen only and the best when you have trust. And trust you build when you know each other, and you know each other when you do together projects. So this is we have identified 8 priority industrial ecosystems, which are very relevant for the situation on the basis of the studies of the level of the destruction in Ukraine. So this is airspace and defense, agri-food, construction, digital, electronics, health, mobility, transport, automotive, and renewable energy. Next slide, please. And we believe that all these 1,500 cluster organizations in the EU can find the partners in the Ukrainian clusters. When the war started, and here I can pay a big attribute to Mr. Alexander Yurchak from Ukraine, who very much initiated the whole collaboration, particularly with the European Cluster Alliance, so that Ukrainian Cluster Alliance is now part of the European Cluster Alliance, and is setting up the whole structure of clusters in Ukraine. But of course, it's not exclusive. There are still clusters which are not in this group. This call is open, but I need to pay tribute to Mr. Yurchak for having organized this Ukrainian Cluster Alliance as a structure which is kind of organized effort and partner for collaboration with the European Cluster Alliance. Next slide, please. So I would still ask if you want. Also, we have already 700, so we are full. We have the European Cluster Conference on the 7th, 8th of May. There will be Ukrainians. There will be the very best beginning, very best opportunity to exchange with European clusters. So you are invited to register. Next slide, which is the last slide. Next slide, please. So, in summary, go for green, digital, and resilience in cross-cutting skills, funding, and technology, and prepare applications which will start building partnerships between EU and Ukrainian clusters, meaning businesses and researchers integrated under cluster portfolio. Thank you very much for your attention, and yeah, I give voice back to Ramonas. Thank you, Ramonas.
Thank you, Marek, for this very thorough policy context overview. Now we all know why this call was needed. We are showing now to you again the information how to pose the questions. So you either go to slido.com and you type cluster UA, and you will be able to enter your questions, or you scan the QR code. At the moment, we have not received any questions, so the presentation was very clear. Thanks a lot for that. And we are moving then to the next presentation, Zita Soldos, the call coordinator of this call. She will provide you with general information on the call. The floor is yours, Zita.
Thank you, Ramonas. So my name is Zita Zsoldos. I work as a project advisor at the EISNEL, that stands for the European Innovation Council and SMEs Executive Agency. This EU executive agency is responsible for managing this call. On the first slide, I will talk about some call basics, but before I start my presentation, I would like to reassure you that this presentation will be uploaded to the events website. So you will see many hyperlinks for all the slides, and after the presentation, you will have access to these links. So the title of the call is EU-Ukraine Cluster Partnership Program. The budget is 3 million euros, and our intention is to fund 6 projects. So it means that the maximum grant amount will be 500,000 euros per project. The expected project duration is between 18 and 24 months. So you have to submit your proposals through the Funding and Tenders portal. But the Funding and Tenders portal is not only a service where you can submit your proposals, it is also the place where you will find useful documents, useful information, the questions and answers section, and templates. Next slide, please. Yes, so about the indicative call timeline. As you know, the call was published on 19th of March, and the deadline to submit the proposals is 4th of June, 5 p.m. Central European Time. Please respect this deadline very well. Don't be late, not even with 1 minute, because the system will automatically cut off at 5. So if you submit your proposal after this time, your proposal will be out of the competition. After the call deadline, we will start immediately the evaluation procedure that will last from June until September. And in October, if everything goes smoothly, we will inform all applicants about the outcome of the evaluation in the form of so-called evaluation result letter. With the successful applicants, we will start the preparation of the grant agreement, and our intention is that the project can start in February 2025. During the implementation of the project, you will inform about the progress of the project implementation, the granting authority through deliverables and technical reports. These will be also deliverables because they are not linked to payments, and depending on the length of the project, through the interim and final payments. The last 2 reportings are linked to payments. Next slide, please. Yes. So on this slide, I will explain the different categories of the applicants. But before I start, I would like to highlight that before submitting your applications, all beneficiaries, affiliated entities, and associated partners must be registered in the participant registry. My colleague will give a presentation about this tool later. So, what are the different categories of the applicants? There are the beneficiaries who will sign the grant agreement. They will receive EU funding, and as I mentioned, they must be registered and validated in the participant register. The affiliated entities, they have link, either a legal link or a capital link to the beneficiary. They do not sign the grant agreement, but they receive EU funding, and they also must be registered and validated. It's very important to know and take note of it that affiliated entities, they do not count to the minimum eligibility criteria of the consortium. Associated partners, they are not former recipient of the EU funding, but they still must be registered. And there are the subcontractors. You can subcontract limited part of your project, but never a core task. You cannot subcontract, for example, project management. And you have to indicate in the proposal form that which task would you like to subcontract, and you have to justify that. There are third parties providing, giving in-kind contributions. They are not formal recipients of EU funding. In-kind contribution can be, for example, providing a venue for an event. Proposals must be submitted by a consortium of applicants. It means that not sole applicant can submit a proposal. It has to be a consortium. And the consortium must appoint a coordinator. The coordinator will be also the primary contact point for us later during the implementation of the project, and also even before that during the grant agreement preparation if the proposal is successful. Next slide, please. So this is a short summary of the evaluation process. I will talk about each step in a more detailed way on the next slides. So after the submission deadline, we will start the admissibility and eligibility check of the proposals. At a certain point, we will also examine that if there is any applicant who must be excluded from the evaluation. Exclusions are mainly linked to bankruptcy, fraud, tax avoidance, and so on. Then the evaluation of the proposal will start with the assistance of independent external experts. And during this phase, we will already check the operational capacity of the consortium. At the end of the evaluation of the proposals, we will set up a ranking list based on the scores the proposals obtained. And with the successful proposals, we will start the preparation of the grant agreement. During this phase, we will perform a thorough financial capacity check. Next slide, please. So now about the details about the first step of the evaluation procedure. This is when we will check the if the proposals meet the admissibility requirements. What are these requirements? The first and most important requirement is perhaps that you have to submit the proposal through the funding and tender portal in electronic format. You cannot send your application via email or via post. You have to respect the deadline. It's 4th of June, 5 o'clock p.m. Central European Time. Please don't leave to last minute the submission of the proposal. It would be really a pity to miss the deadline because of a last minute technical hiccup. The applications must be readable, accessible, and printable. It means that you have to upload all documents in PDF format. And you have to be particularly careful with the so-called detailed budget table. This table is in an Excel format when you fill it in. And be very careful when you transform it to PDF that you don't lose any data. The application must be complete. What does it mean that it's complete? That it contains all forms and annexes that we require. So first of all, form part A, this is an administrative form mainly. The part B of the proposal is the technical description of the project. And there are the annexes, the detailed budget table, the CVs of the core project team, list of previous key projects from the last 4 years, and the so-called Annex 5. This is the eligibility checklist, and this is where you will select that to which ecosystem your proposals belong to. So, very important. Annex 5 is not on the funding and tender portal. You have to go to the ASME's webpage and download this template from there. It's very important that you don't forget about Annex 5, because without that, your proposal is not complete. Next slide, please. Electronic submission. So on this slide, I will talk in more details about the different forms and annexes. So the part A, it's an administrative form that you will fill in online. It contains the abstract of the proposals and the declarations on behalf of the consortium partners. You will provide information, administrative data about the participating organizations like name, legal address, contact details, and so on. And you will have to fill in a summarized budget table also. Part B of the proposal is the technical description. It's very important that it has a page limit, 50 pages. The evaluators will not take into account any pages above the page limit. So when you write your proposal, please make sure that you respect this requirement. Also, when you download the template, then you will see that inside the template there will be instructions about font size and so on. You have to respect the instructions that you find there. Detailed budget table, please choose the right template that ends with 90. And also, as I mentioned, make sure that when you transform this document to PDF, that you don't lose any data. It's also very important that when you fill in the budget tables, both in part A and part B, that you are consistent, so there are no discrepancies between the two budget tables. If there are discrepancies, the table in part A will prevail. You have to provide the CVs of your core team and the list of the previous key projects from the last 4 years. And again, don't forget about Annex 5. It's on the ASME's webpage. Next slide, please. So this is the visualization of the submission system. This is what you will see when you log in. Next slide, please. Now I will talk about the Annex 5 eligibility checklist and ecosystem selection. I will talk about later in a detailed way about eligibility criteria of the applicants, but now I will just give you a short summary in order to understand what this checklist is about. So in order to have an eligible consortium, you have to have minimum 3 different legal entities from 3 different eligible countries, and one applicant, minimum one applicant has to be a cluster organization from the EU, and another organization must be a cluster organization from Ukraine. The cluster organizations have to register on the European Cluster Collaboration Platform, or if they haven't registered yet, they have to submit the registration request. So on this eligibility checklist template, the 2 first questions are related to this registration on the ECCP website. Next slide, please. The third point on the eligibility checklist is linked to the other requirements. As I mentioned, if the participants have to come from eligible country, and one cluster organization has to come from Ukraine, the other one from EU, you have to provide all information under point 3 of the eligibility sheet. And on the last page of this document, you have to select the ecosystem that your proposal belongs to. So you have to choose one. So if you feel that your proposal is involved in more ecosystem, you have to choose the one that is the most dominant. You have to choose one ecosystem from here. And next slide, please. So the eligibility requirement of the applicants. The applicants must be legal entities, and they have to be established in an eligible country. What are the eligible countries? The eligible countries are the EU member states, Ukraine, and those countries who are participating in the single market program. Those countries who are in the accession process to the single market program, but they haven't finalized this accession procedure yet, they can apply, but please note that the accession procedure has to be finalized by the signature of the grant. Next slide, please. And the definition of the different applicants who can participate in this call. First of all, cluster organization. On the next slide, there is a definition. I will read it out loud for you. And then business network organizations and other type of support organizations like technology centers, research institutes, public authorities, both on regional and administration level. You will find the detailed description in section 6 of the call document. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, among the participants, there has to be a cluster organization from an EU member state and a cluster organization from Ukraine. And we provide a definition of cluster organization. As it's a definition, I just read it as it is. So for the purpose of this call for proposals, cluster organizations have to be understood as the legal entities that support the strengthening of collaboration, networking, and learning in innovation clusters and act as innovation support providers by providing or channeling specialized and customized business support services to stimulate innovation activities, especially in SMEs. So this is the definition. And as I mentioned earlier, the cluster organizations or cluster networks, they must be registered or they have to submit their registration to the European Cluster Collaboration Platform. Next slide, please. So we reached the eligibility requirements of the consortium slide. On this slide, I will explain that how consortium should look like. So the proposals must be submitted by a consortium, or in this call, we call them also partnership, of at least 3 applicants. So the minimum requirement is 3 applicants minimum, and these applicants must comply with the following conditions. Minimum 3 independent legal entities from 3 different eligible countries. At least 1 beneficiary must be a cluster organization established in Ukraine, and at least 1 cluster organization must be established in an EU member state. Next slide, please. Financial capacity check. So during the grant agreement preparation phase, we will check the financial capacity of the participants. We examine if the participant is stable and has the sufficient resources to implement the project. Public bodies or those entities who receive less than 60,000 euros, they will not go through this financial capacity check. The rest of the applicants will go through this financial capacity check. My colleague later will talk about this in detail. Next slide, please. Operational capacity and exclusion. So during the evaluation procedure, the independent experts, the evaluators, will analyze the operational capacity of the applicant. This means know-how, qualifications, and other resources needed to successfully implement the project. And exclusion, as I mentioned earlier, we also examine if the any applicant needs to be excluded. You will see a long list about the possible scenarios until section 7 of the call document. As I mentioned earlier, it mainly means bankruptcy, fraud, tax avoidance, and so on. Next slide, please. So the key elements. Project budget, it will be 500,000 euro per project. This is the maximum grant amount. However, this does not preclude the submission or selection of proposal requesting other amounts. The grant awarded may be lower than the amount requested in order to respect this maximum grant amount condition of 500,000 euros. The length of the project will be between 18 and 24 months. And when you write the proposal, you have to address the two specific objectives that Marek already mentioned. So one is the developing value chains and interlinkages between EU and Ukrainian companies. This means practically networking. So the objective is to connect the EU and Ukrainian companies to strengthen the value chains availability to cope with the green transition, digital transition, and increase resilience. The other specific objective is fostering the cluster capacity building and the professionalization of support for both EU and Ukrainian SMEs. And this means practically training. It means the capacity building of the EU and Ukrainian cluster organizations, and to promote cross-cluster learning to help the cluster managers. When you prepare your proposals, you have to prepare a clear list of deliverables that will cover the main outputs of the various tasks, and you have to design your key performance indicators to measure the performance of the proposed activities and their impact. Next slide, please. Evaluation procedures. So the evaluation procedure starts, as I mentioned, with the admissibility and eligibility check. And those proposals who pass this stage, they will move to the evaluation of the proposals. The evaluation of proposals will be performed by an evaluation committee. This is assisted by independent external experts. The experts will evaluate each proposal against the evaluation award criteria. I will talk about this criteria on the next slide. And at the end of the evaluation, we will create the ranking list of the proposals based on the scores the proposals obtained. At the end of the evaluation, every applicant will be informed about the outcome through the so-called evaluation result letter. With the successful proposals, we will start the preparation of the grant agreement. There will be proposals who will be put on the reserve list, which means that for whatever reason we cannot finalize the grant agreement preparation with a successful proposal, we can still fund another project from the reserve list. And there will be the other projects that will be rejected. Next slide, please. So about the award criteria and thresholds, so there are three main evaluation criteria. This is the relevance, quality, and impact. And under quality, you see there are two major sub-criteria, the project design and implementation, and the project team and cooperation arrangement. Very important to know that you have to read very carefully this section because the evaluators will use this criteria to evaluate your proposal. This is really like a checklist. They will go point by point and analyze that if you addressed these requirements. And so when you plan your project, when you sit down with your project partners, you really have to think and analyze that considering your competencies, how you can address all requirements, all criteria described here. So the relevance is focusing on the clarity and consistency of the project, how you address the objectives and the priorities of the call, and how you address the European transnational dimension. The quality criteria is focusing on the project design and implementation. This is about technical quality, about the work plan, about risk management, about cost effectiveness, and so on. Project team and cooperation arrangements, very important when the evaluators are analyzing, for example, the operational capacity of the project. So you have to really address very well this part. And the impact where the evaluators will examine what is the long-term impact of your proposal on the target group, on the general public, how the project is sustainable after the EU funding ends, and how realistic are the KPIs. Everything you will find in the call text, please read it very carefully. About the passing score, so there is a minimum passing score per criteria, and there is also an overall passing score. So if you don't reach the or pass the minimum score, it means that your proposal is out of the competition and it will be rejected. Next slide, please. So some tips and tricks. It sounds obvious, but we still have to say it. Please read carefully the call documents, the questions and answers section. Please check all templates, read the instructions in the templates, and don't forget about the annexes. On the funding and tender portal, there is also an online manual, very useful. Please read it carefully. When you write your proposal, try to put yourself in the shoe of the evaluator and write your proposal in a structured way. Be focused, be specific, don't be vague, use quantification, and be also consistent across the text. Write in a reader-friendly manner. And don't just repeat what you read in the call text, try to show why your proposal is specific, why it stands out. Again, don't forget about Annex 5. Without Annex 5, your proposal is not complete. It's on the ASME's webpage. And again, don't wait until last minute with the submission. Next slide, please. So when you build your budget, then your budget has to reflect the deliverables and the description of the proposal, and it has to be cost effective. When you prepare your proposal, please be very clear how you divide the tasks and responsibilities among the project partners. And don't forget that if your proposal is successful, you have to implement this in practice. During the grant agreement preparation phase, there is no possibility to make major changes. We can do only minor technical modifications. So you have, even though you have to be ambitious, but you have to be still realistic because you have to implement the project as it is in the proposal. Thank you. Next slide. So this is my last slide. Here you can find useful links. In the first part, I listed a few links where you can look for project partners. You can find partners on the funding and tender portal, on the Enterprise Europe Network database, on the European Cluster Collaboration Platform. It's an important remark that please don't include any partners in your proposal who didn't give their consent. And as a best practice, I advise that you reach out those applicants, those project managers who had already successful application, and they can give you advice how to write a successful proposal. If you have any problem, first step is check the manual. The online manual is really well written. It's a very useful document. You will find the step-by-step description how to submit your proposal, how to prepare it. If you have IT-related technical question, like you forget your password, you have trouble with the access rights, there is a link to the IT help desk. And with any other questions, please send an email to our functional mailbox. You will find the replies on the questions and answers section of the participant portal, funding and tender portal. So this was my presentation. I know it was a lot of information, but as I mentioned, it will be recorded and it will be also uploaded to our website. So you will find it back later and read it, see it again. Thank you for your attention, and I give back the floor to Ramonas. Thank you.
Thank you, Zita, for this very comprehensive presentation. Now we know how to apply, what are the details of the call. I'm looking to the Slido page. We still have not received any questions. So it seems that the presentation, both presentations so far were very clear. Thanks a lot to Zita, thanks a lot to Marek. And since there are no questions, we then move on to the next presentation. And I'm glad to present our colleague Jana Dobiatowa, who is our financial colleague responsible for the call and will guide you through the financial aspects of the call. Jana, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you. So as introduced by my colleagues, I will now present the financial provisions applicable to this call. Next slide, please. So there are two financial documents that you will need to prepare, which are the summarized budget table and the detailed budget table. So first, you will have to prepare your detailed budget table following the template available in Part B of the application as mentioned by Zita, which is a mandatory annex and has to be uploaded as part of your proposal. And then you will finalize the summarized budget table from Part A online. Please note that the amounts that are entered into the summarized budget table and the detailed budget table match and correspond to each other. In case of any discrepancies, the amounts that are in the summarized budget table will then prevail, but we will try to iron out any discrepancies in the grant agreement preparation stage. Next slide, please. So I will now explain how the detailed budget table is structured and how you should fill in the necessary information. So there's a couple of introductory Excel sheets which are not to be submitted. It's sheets 1 and 2. Nevertheless, in sheet 2, you will need to fill in the work packages, all the work packages, and then continue working in sheets 3, 4, and 5, which are the sheets that will then be submitted with your application. Next slide, please. On sheet 3, which is the most important one, it's the detailed table per participant. You will have to present one complete table per each participant, and if there are any affiliated entities, for affiliated entities. And you need to keep in mind that, as it also mentioned, the budget should be based on detailed, reasonable, and accurate estimates, as no major changes will be possible in the grant agreement preparation stage. The budget here is broken down by cost category and work packages. And for technical reasons, try to remember that the number of work packages has to be the same in all cost categories. So in case there are no costs planned in a specific cost category, you just leave that work package empty and leave it as it is and submit like that. Next slide, please. Sheet 4 is then a consolidated table per participant, which is calculated automatically by the system. In case of sheets 3 and 4, you need to always have one detailed table per participant, which is followed by one consolidated table per participant, meaning that if you have, for example, 5 partners in the project, you will have 5 detailed tables and 5 consolidated tables. And all of these will be then followed by a consolidated table per project, which is sheet 5 of the template. And this sheet then needs to be assembled manually by the coordinator and must also match financial data that are entered and automatically calculated in all the other tables across the application. Next slide, please. The detailed budget table, as I said, is presented per participant, per work package, and per cost category. The budget has to be in balance, meaning that project costs have to equal project income, where in this particular call, project costs are personnel costs, subcontracting, purchase costs, and indirect costs. And in project income, we find the EU contribution, the revenues and contributions by third parties, and your own resources. I will now explain a bit what can be included in each of the cost categories. So starting with personnel costs, these can fall under any of the following 4 subcategories that I will explain a little bit in detail. The first subcategory are costs for employees. which are eligible as personnel costs in case they fulfill the general eligibility conditions. They are related to personnel working for the beneficiary under an employment contract and are assigned to the action. The calculation method for employees' personnel costs is the daily rate for the person multiplied by the number of day equivalents worked on the action as per the timesheet that the person will be signing. Here you need to keep in mind that there is a horizontal ceiling of 215 days per year that a person can work under any EU contracts. Then the next cost category under personnel costs is costs for natural persons that are working under a direct contract other than an employment contract. And similar conditions apply to seconded personnel. So these costs are eligible in case this personnel works under similar conditions to those of employees. This means that the same supervision rules apply, the same office presence rule apply, etc. The costs that are associated with this work are not significantly different from those for personnel performing similar tasks with an employment contract. Then you also need to keep in mind that the work results belong then to the beneficiary, and the costs declared amount solely to remuneration and taxation costs for the person in question. Then specifically for the seconded personnel, you need to always keep in mind that these costs need to follow the applicable national legislation, meaning that the secondment contract needs to be compliant with the national legislation on secondment. And what this really means in terms of seconded personnel is it's a transfer of personnel from a third party to the beneficiary, but the seconded person is still paid and employed by the third party. Next slide, please. So the next category under personnel costs are SME owners. Here it is important to say that these need to be really direct owners or co-owners of the SME. We need to be able to identify in the portal that the organization is indeed an SME. And what very often happens here is that in some countries, these SMEs are owned by another SME, which then have the direct owner being the person. This, in our case, would not be eligible. So you really need to have in the registration documents the names of the people to whom you want to associate these costs, because they have a specific rate applicable to them. Which is a daily rate. These rates can be found in the linked commission decision or also in Annex 2A to your grant agreement. And here you just need to keep in mind that there is a specific country-specific correction coefficient that you need to apply to this calculation, to this unit cost rate. Next slide, please. So this is what the personnel costs encoding looks like in the detailed budget table. Here you see that the costs are split in the categories as I presented them. So A1 to A4. You need to make sure that you encode data in the right category, meaning that you either choose the basically monthly rate or daily rate for the SME owner, and you always have to provide the applicable rate and the time that you are planning for this person. You also need to fill in the last two columns, which is whether this person is working also in other work packages, and the description of the tasks and the role of this person. Here you do not need to invent anything new. This information can be taken from the technical description. So from Annex 1 Part B, it can be copy pasted, it can be basically, it doesn't have to be the whole description, but something from that, it can match exactly what's written the technical description. Next slide, please. This is where you can be taking the information from. So this is mirroring what is in the detailed budget table. Next slide, please. So the next cost category is subcontracting. This basically serves the purchase goods, works, and services that are related to the implementation of specific tasks, which are part of the action. The subcontractor here works without direct supervision of the beneficiary. And you need to always keep in mind that only a limited part of the action can be subcontracted. So for example, no core tasks of the coordinator or management tasks can be subcontracted. And it's always better to, during the grant agreement preparation stage, to kind of verify with the project officer. When budgeting subcontracting costs, you have to ensure the best value for money, or if appropriate, the lowest price. And you have to keep in mind that the subcontractors have to be selected based on either procurement procedure, selection procedure, or your internal procurement rules. In case of audit, this might be questioned. You also need to avoid any conflict of interest. Here you also see what subcontracting costs look like in the detailed budget table. So you basically need to provide the name of the item, what are the foreseen costs for the item, and a little bit of description again of the subcontracted project activities, which again can be taken from the technical part of the project, where you anyway need to describe subcontracting costs. Next slide, please. So this is again the mirroring table from the technical description part. And as I said, again, you do not have to invent anything new. You can copy paste the same information. Next slide, please. Now we'll move on to purchase costs. Purchase contracts are contracts that are made to get services, works, and goods that do not cover the implementation of the action, but their purchase is necessary to carry out the action. Purchase costs are then divided into 3 subcategories, which are travel costs, equipment costs, and then costs of other goods and services. It is maybe good to know here that purchase costs do not have to be indicated in Annex 1, so they are only detailed a little bit in the budget table, in the detailed budget table. Next slide, please. So I'll start with travel, accommodation, and subsistence costs. So these are eligible if they are budgeted for personnel working on the action. They have to be justified, and they have to be budgeted as unit costs. This unit costs are basically based on amounts that are detailed in the linked commission decision, but also in your Annex 2A. And a little bit different principles apply for each. So for travel as such, this cost is calculated based on the distance between the departure point, which is usually the place of employment, and the arrival point, whatever it is, a study visit or a conference. So for example, based on a trip from Lisbon to Madrid, you will calculate the applicable distance band, and the distance band will then give you the applicable unit cost rate. You need to keep in mind that the distance is calculated one way. However, the unit cost covers both ways, so a return trip. So you should not multiply the applicable unit cost in your application. Then accommodation costs. So those are also unit costs, where 1 unit is calculated as 1 night. And subsistence costs are calculated as 24-hour periods. So here again, you cannot use, for example, 1.5 days for subsistence. It always has to be rounded up or down to the nearest full day. In some cases, it is possible that you will be budgeting or then reporting eventually travel costs as actual costs that were incurred by the person. But this is in only very specific cases that are not covered by the Commission decision. I'll give you one example, which is, for example, for travels that are below 50 kilometers. This can happen in case you would normally, under your organization's rules, pay travel costs to the person, then this would be eligible as actual costs. Next slide, please. So this is what travel costs look like in the detailed budget table. Here you need to really pay attention whether you are budgeting actual or unit costs and work in the relevant column. And please keep in mind that for us to be able to double check whether you're using the correct applicable unit cost rate, we need to know the details that you were using to calculate this rate. So in the description column, which is the last highlighted column, we need you to provide the information that is in the box, which is basically whether it is an international or national travel, the destination and departure point, the number of days that you're planning to stay, the number of persons traveling. In some cases, it would also be the means of transport where it is not obvious. And I think this is it. This is enough for us to be able to determine the right unit cost rate. We do understand here that especially at the grant agreement preparation stage, these can be very rough estimates. So what we suggest is that you choose, for example, the furthest plausible destination for your project, and you work with that. However, we still need you to provide the details that you used to calculate the rate so that we are able to match the information to the amounts and there are no discrepancies. And then, of course, the reality will show, and we will then see at the reporting stage how this materialized. Next slide, please. The other purchase cost category are equipment costs. So purchase of equipment used for the action must be declared as depreciation costs. And these are calculated on the basis of costs that are actually incurred and written off in accordance with the international accounting standards or your organization's usual accounting practices. It is important to remember here that only the portion of the costs that corresponds to the rate that was actually used for the action during the action duration can be taken into account. At the same time, you also should know that costs for renting or leasing equipment are also eligible, but this also only in case if the leasing or renting costs do not exceed the depreciation costs of similar equipment and do not include any financing fees. In the detailed budget table, as you see on the slide, there are different boxes for purchase of equipment and for rent or leasing of equipment. So again, just pay attention which applies to your particular situation. In terms of equipment, there's one particularity where we often see mistakes. Keep in mind that computers, for example, or software or printers are usually not eligible in this category because they should be covered by indirect cost category, so by the overheads. However, if they need to have very specific technical features, and you can duly justify why you need to buy these specific software or computers. In that case, we could consider them eligible, but normally they are not. Next slide, please. So other costs, so these are purchases of goods, works, and services that are again calculated based on actually incurred costs. And always keep in mind that here procurement principles again apply. These need to be purchased specifically for the implementation action. And here we would ask you to kind of make sure that you list the items in the correct category, and you provide a little bit of details in the description of the task activities column, because what happens to us often is that, for example, you see the first line is consumables, and then in the description column we see consumables again. We need a little bit more details. Of course, you do not have to list all the items. Again, we understand these are estimates, but we need to roughly know what you have in mind for these items, specifically if it's higher amounts that we are talking about. Next slide, please. The last cost category are indirect costs. These are calculated as a flat rate of 7% of the eligible direct costs, so of the other cost categories. So normally here you do not have to list them. You do not have to make any calculations. There is no breakdown of these costs required anywhere in the application. Next slide, please. So this then brings us to the other side of the equation, so project income. The green table that you see on the slide follows each detailed budget table per participant. Here, what is covered is the EU contribution, so it's a 90% of all the other cost for all the cost categories in this call, and it is calculated automatically by the system. Here we ask you, and you will see it in the detailed budget table, we ask you, in order to avoid technical issues, that you request 1 cent less than the maximum EU contribution, because otherwise it can cause a bit of trouble sometimes. Basically, the other revenues, you can see them, and contributions by third parties, were also mentioned by Zita. You can see it on the slide. And then the remaining amount, which is then the difference, is automatically calculated as your own resources or the own contribution of the beneficiary. Next slide, please. So that was all for the detailed budget table, and now I will only briefly present the payment arrangements for this particular call. So after the signature of the grant agreement, you will normally receive a pre-financing of 70% to start working on the project. Further, there is no interim payment planned for projects under this call. So there's only one final technical and financial report, which is linked to the request for the payment of the balance. And keep in mind that all payments are made to the coordinator. However, the coordinator must distribute all the payments that are received from the granting authority to the other beneficiaries without any unjustified delay. I also understand this is a lot of information on the financial aspects, but we are here to provide resources. We are here to help you if your proposal is accepted. So good luck with that. That will be everything from me.
Thank you, Jana, for this very clear presentation. I think the main message is that make sure that your budget is coherent with what you are planning in the work plan. Again, you see the Slido information. You either go to slido.com and type cluster UA, or you click on the QR code and then go to the page and ask your question. So far, we have not received the questions on financial matters, so we move on to the next presentation. And I would like to ask our colleague, Alin Sidzihimov from REA, to present us briefly about how to register in the registration portal. Elin.
Thank you, Ramonas. Good morning, everyone. My name is Elin Sijimov, and I work in the European Research Executive Agency, in particular the Central Validation Service. And in today's presentation, on the next slide, you'll see the outline of the presentation. I will introduce you to our main activities. We'll look into the how to register your organization in the participant register to obtain a PIC number. Then we will go through the validation process. I will stress a little bit on the how to communicate with the Central Validation Service with regards to the validation process. And in the end of the presentation, you have hyperlinks to helpful documents that will answer most of your questions probably. But let's start now with the next slide, where I will introduce you to our main activities. And the first one is the verification of legal existence and status of your entity. So basically, we need to establish whether your organization is currently existing and under what status. So it could be an association or some kind of other private or public entity. And based on the documents we are going to that you upload, we are going to establish that. We are also responsible for the appointment of the LEAR, or the legal entity appointed representative, the person who manages your PIC number, and it's also responsible for the interaction with the EU. Then we also validate any legal changes that might occur with relation to your entity that already is valid. We also assess universal takeovers. So that's when one entity ceases to exist, but another one takes over its portfolio of rights and obligations. We encode the bank accounts, and we prepare the financial capacity assessment, ownership control assessment, which are for specific programs only, and the ex post status verification, such as SME and mid-cap status checks. So this is like very briefly covering our portfolio of activities in the Central Validation Service. On the next slide, we will go now to the actual process of registering your organization to obtain a PIC number, which you need in order to submit your proposal. And there are two scenarios. Maybe your organization has already participated in another call, or already has a PIC number registered in the system. So on the left-hand side, you can see how it looks to the search button to search for your organization and potentially reuse the PIC that you already have. But in case you don't find it, you can register a new PIC or participant identification code. We will look into this second scenario because it also actually includes a check in the system whether a duplicate PIC exists, or whether a PIC exists already for your entity. So on the next slide, you will see how the wizard, step-by-step wizard looks like when you start the registration process. First, you introduce the main legal data, such as legal name, registration, country, number, VAT number, etc. And the system will check whether your entity is already registered. If not, you continue by introducing additional organization data, legal information. Also here, very important, we strongly advise you to add additional users, authorized users at this stage, because this will act as a backup in case of the self-registrant, the person who could register the PIC at this moment might be for some reason in the future, like in 1-2 months, this person might not be able to access their email, or for some reason the register. So this authorized user will be still able to access the PIC and perform any other actions if necessary. And then it's the last step in which the registration is completed, and you are going to receive your participant identification code or PIC number in a declared status. This declared status is the necessary one for you to submit your application. At this stage, you don't need to have your PIC validated. But on the next slide, I will speak a little bit more about this. So this is the timeline that you see, the process overview of the validation. We completed the first star of the registration, and now we will go to the second one, which is the validation of your legal data. We can go on the next slide now. So the data that you have already registered, it's verified by the Central Validation Service only before the signature of a grant agreement or a contract. So at this stage, then it's necessary to get your PIC number validated. The advantage of this process is that it's performed only once when you need to sign your first grant agreement or a contract, and then in the future it is reused when you participate in other procedures. It is harmonized and unified process, so it's always performed for everyone on the basis of the supporting documents provided and in accordance with the EU financial regulation and the rules on legal entity validation, LEAR appointment, and financial capacity assessment. You can see that this is a hyperlink for the rules, and it's provided at the last slide as well, because this document, it's very detailed, and it actually explains anything linked to the legal validation and LEAR appointment and financial capacity assessment. So any kind of questions you might have, probably will find the answer there, but of course, if not, there are other resources available as well. You'll see them at the end. On the next slide, I would like to introduce you to what kind of document you need to expect to be asked for to upload. So depending on the type of your entity, there will be a legal entity form. So this it could be for a private entity, for a public entity, or for a natural person, and it needs to be completed, dated, stamped if you have, and signed. Also, we would need a VAT extract not older than 1 year, and if you're not registered for VAT, a proof of exemption. A registration extract also not older than 1 year. This is for private bodies, so we can establish that your entity is currently existing. For public bodies, we ask for law, decree, decision, or other type of document with which the entity is established. For international organization, this is the treaty of establishment. And for non-profit organization, we ask also for the statutes, because this is the document where the non-distribution of profit is normally specified. On the next slide, I would like to point out how you are going to communicate with the Central Validation Service with any questions related to the legal validation and LEAR appointment and financial capacity assessment. You're going to receive notification email to your email address, but to respond back to this email, you need to log in the participant register, and there exclusively use the messaging function to communicate with us. So this email that you're going to receive is just a notification. On the next slide, and I strongly encourage you to use this communication channel with us directly, because like that you reach with the messaging function in the portal, you reach directly the case handler on our side, who is the person working specifically on the validation of your case, and they would be most knowledgeable of the ongoing process and what else might be needed for you to complete it as quickly as possible. Now on this slide, I would like to explain to you two scenarios in which you already have a PIC number in the system. And it could be first, let's look at if you have a PIC number, it has been registered some time ago and it's in declared status, so it's not yet valid. But you are not the self-registrant, you are not the person who registered this PIC number. And therefore you don't have access to it. In this case, if you need to have access to a PIC number with which you are going to participate, you need to create a new one and inform us. Then we are going to link this old PIC number to the new one, so your entity has a PIC number that has access to. In the second case scenario, it's you find in the system a valid PIC number of your entity, but you again don't have access to it. For example, the leader who normally has access to the PIC, it's not longer within your organization, and there are no account administrators. So in this case, you need to appoint a new leader who will have access to your PIC number, and there is a specific leader recovery procedure dedicated to that. It's again a step-by-step wizard in which you need to upload specific documents and appoint the new leader. And now on the next slide, you can see the main resources that will help you to go through the validation process. And of course, here there are specific help desks that you can contact in case you have any questions. But now you can use the Slido to ask me anything that's linked to the validation process if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aline, for this information, how to register, what the documents are asked, etc. We can go now maybe to the Slido and to see the questions. And I think the first question, Aline, is for you. Is this validation needed also to the organizations that already applied and got an EU-funded project? And thanks for the whole webinar.
Thank you for the question. If you we look at the scenario where you already have a PIC number in the register. However, the PIC number could be in a declared status or in a valid status. So in any case, you don't need a new PIC. If you have access to this one, you can use this PIC number to submit a new proposal. If your PIC is not valid and you need to sign a grant agreement later, you need to get this PIC validated, and then it's you need to have access to this PIC. So in short, you can reuse the PIC number that you already have, but you need to be sure that you have access to this PIC number. If you don't, and it's in a declared status, you would need to register a new one. If it's already valid and you don't have access, you need to reappoint the leader. But this is I already explained in the presentation. You can use the PIC that you already have.
And I think in this case, the potential applicant is asking what to do in when they already have EU-funded projects. So I suppose the PIC will be validated. The only thing which we might still ask, financial documents if it is private company, right?
Yes, if the financial capacity assessment is needed, yes, it needs, and we don't have a recent financial capacity assessment. We would need to perform a new one. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. We go to the next question, and I think it will be for Marek. In the context, priorities are presented, but in Annex 5, there are also others, including tourism, which is our main interest. Is tourism focus also allowed? Marek, what would you say?
Yes, indeed. We don't exclude. So basically, what we set is the priority industrial ecosystems that, on the basis of the analysis and as well the study of distractions, we named this 8, which are priority for us, but we don't exclude the others. So the thing is, in the application, you can show the added value for this partnership, but keeping the answer short. No, tourism is not excluded, but it's not priority.
So the reason for highlighting those first ones is because this would be the policy priority, but others are also welcome, right?
Indeed. So policy priorities are the ones 8, but others are possible to submit. So yeah, this is. I would like to say that maybe in 9 months there won't be a war.
Yes, yeah. And other priorities might appear. Exactly.
So we left ourselves this flexibility, so we allow other ecosystems to apply as well. But at this moment in time, the priorities are the 8 that we mentioned. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question I think will be for Zita. Could you please spend a couple of words about the mandatory deliverable, which consists of 2 additional reports? How do you imagine them and how they differ from the reports linked to the payment? In the meantime, if you have any other questions, do not hesitate to type them in. They will appear on the screen and our presenters will be able to answer them as well. Zita.
Yes, so about the deliverables, indeed, among the compulsory deliverables, there are these technical reports. So what are the differences between these technical reports and reports linked to the payment? So you have to think about the duration of the project, and depending on the duration of the project, we will define that at which moment you have to submit this technical report. So for example, in the case of a project of 24 months, let's say that you have to submit this report, technical report at 6 months. So this is the first difference, that you will not report about the first interim reporting period that is linked to the payment, and it covers 12 months, but it's a shorter, you cover a shorter period. You will show in this report about the progress that you achieved since the beginning of the project, that what are your main achievements, what are the challenges, what are the difficulties, what are the deviations that, if any, that we have to know about, and so on. But this is not linked to the payment. This is really to show us the progress that you made based on your work plan. And then the interim or final report that are linked to payment, these are more detailed, and of course they are covering the whole reporting period. Here in both reports, you will address also the key performance indicators, but of course at the beginning of the project, you will be most probably in a backlog comparing to your target. And in this interim and final payment, there is a financial part, a financial reporting. In the technical report, there is no financial reporting. So in the interim and financial reporting, depending on the requested amount, there are financial statements and certificate for financial statement and other different templates that you have to fill in concerning the financial aspect of your project. So this is also a difference. I don't know, Ramonas, if you want to complement it.
I think the main point is that these additional reports allows us to see the progress and then to help the projects in case we need to intervene or in case they need some support, or also to identify good practice examples which we could then share also with the colleagues in DG Grow and with the whole cluster community. Okay, thanks a lot, Zita. I come back to Marek with another question. In the code text, it is specified that we need to focus on the actions on one ecosystem. What about the cross ecosystem activities?
Yeah, excellent question. This is we actually want you at the first step to learn vertically each other. It means that we concentrate on concrete industrial ecosystem in the lead. But of course, in the current world, you have all cross-sectoral intersections between ecosystems. If you are developing digital solutions for agriculture, you have cross-sectoral exchanges. So the main important thing for us is that first of all, you learn each other at the industrial ecosystem. So the industrial ecosystem is it needs to be mentioned. I would like to mention as well that in the coming months, by the end of this year, we will have as well the second round of Euroclusters, and Ukrainian clusters are eligible to this. And there we have open course, which is not only focusing on industrial ecosystem but cross-sectoral. Here in this particular, let's do the first step. Let's learn each other in construction. Learn each other in health, in mobility and transport between clusters. That we exploit this opportunities to learn each other and find collaboration. I think I hope it clarifies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question is about Georgia's participation. Could you please clarify if we can invite a non-profit company from Georgia to our consortium? The call text says that in order to be eligible, the country needs to participate in the program. And we also refer you to the document which lists of participating countries in the single market program. For Georgia, it is written, Georgia has confirmed interest to join SMP program. This means that they have not yet joined the program. And as a conclusion, the potential partners from that country might be eligible only if the country will join the program by the end of the contractualization process. So basically by the end when we will need to sign the grant agreement. Armenia and Georgia, they are both in the same situation. The program has started in 2021, so it's still in the initial stage. Let's hope that the countries will move on quicker, but have a plan B in case you would need to replace that partner with some other one whose country is eligible. Any other questions? Wait some 2 minutes if someone is typing the question. Use the opportunity to ask the question now. Otherwise, there will be always possibility to ask it by email, but don't forget that by email you can ask the questions how far in advance?
28th of May, 1 week before the call deadline.
So the questions by email must be asked 1 week before the call. Afterwards, we will not be able to answer those questions. Looks like everything was very clear. So I would like to thank to all the presenters. Thank you to Marek, thank you for Zita, Jana, Ellen, for your very comprehensive presentations. Thanks a lot for all the team who was behind organizing this whole event, to Maria, Paola, to Marta, and good luck with your applications.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.